hi, Rani. Thanks for
Hi,
doing
it's
this
my pleasure.
for Jacanabooks. So we want to go through your key achievements. We want to talk about why you want 4 more years. It's going to be a bit extensive, and it'll be good.
Sure.
So what have been your key achievements since 2015?
So now it's like a trip through memory lane because it's amazing how fast 4 years goes. Look, if we go back to the beginning of the mandate, it was our commitment to bringing real change and making sure that everybody had a fair shake in Canada. And so we did ask the wealthiest 1% to pay some more in taxes so that we could make sure that we could lower taxes for the middle class. And we did that, and it's made a big difference. I mean, the reason that we have a million new jobs created across the country, and I know we're struggling in Alberta, the world price of oil being cut in half earlier this century made a big difference in our economy. That said, we are seeing the recovery coming to Alberta. Part of the reason we have this million jobs created is not just because of the tax cut, but also because of the Canada Child Benefit. So now we've got 9 out of 10 families receiving the Canada Child Benefit. The old system was everybody got the same amount, checks went to millionaires, and the families who actually needed the most help weren't getting the most help. And so, look, just here in Edmonton Centre, it's about 12,500 kids a month, their parents that are getting the checks. And about 65% of those families are single parent families, which is really something that people need to think about. And when I'm on the doors, I hear moms and dads telling me the Canada Child Benefit, and some people call it the Liberal Baby Bonus. They say, look, I now don't have to choose between shoes or rent or food for my kids. And this summer, I enrolled my child in music lessons, or this spring, my kids got to play soccer. And so that means a lot to me. I mean, we're talking about $52 million a month that comes to Edmonton Centre, and if you, $52 million a year. And so if you add that over the past 3.5 years, we're talking about almost $200 million just to Edmonton Centre families. So where's that money going? Well, the money's going to our local economy. It's going to local businesses. It's going to small businesses. It's going to the bigger businesses. And that is part of how our economy is growing. I also think that it's really important to talk about the new Canadians that have come to Canada. I mean, it was really important for us to be clear that in Canada, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. And so we got rid of all the rules and the laws that the Conservatives put in place that tried to change the kind of citizenship that somebody has. And so it's one citizenship. And what's really important is when we took office, there was about 260,000 new Canadians coming to Canada each year. We have now increased that to 340,000 per year. But there was also a backlog of 150,000 people that were just waiting. Their claims weren't being processed. And so we have cleared out all of those claims to come to Canada. And so that's a lot more Canadians who are now here working, paying taxes, and building up our community. And so I'm very proud of that. I didn't ask for the job, but Prime Minister asked me to be special advisor on LGBTQ2 issues.
We're coming to that, Randy.
Oh, you'll come to that? Okay, so we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
What else can I say about accomplishments? Our relationship with First Nations people, Inuit and Métis. I sit on the Indigenous Caucus. I'm a non-status adopted Cree. My great-grandmother, full-blooded Cree woman, Lucy Brown Eyes. My mom's a quarter Cree. Look, there's no government in the history of Canada that has done more for and with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people than the Justin Trudeau government. And that doesn't mean the work's done. By far, it's not done. We have truth and reconciliation calls to action. We have calls to justice in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report. And so there's a lot more work we have to do. But I can say that I attended the last boil water advisory sod turning in Alberta at Kihiwin last year. And by January of next year, they will have a water treatment facility and there will be no more boil water advisories in Alberta. Now, we've cut the boil water advisories across the country in half. We still have half more to go, but we have said that by 2022, there won't be any more boil water advisories on First Nations reserves anywhere in Canada. I'm also very proud of 2 more pieces of legislation. One is to make sure that First Nations, Métis and Inuit have full control over who gets to raise their children. Because First Nations children and Inuit Métis children are way overrepresented in the child care programs in Alberta and across the country. And it should be a family decision who raises their kids. Kids shouldn't be taken away from their moms, and they certainly shouldn't be taken away from their moms at the hospital, which has happened far too much, not just in our province, but around the country. And then just at the end of the mandate, we were able to pass legislation protecting, enshrining, and enhancing Indigenous languages, because we're losing Indigenous languages as the elders who have protected and preserved the languages are passing away. And so we need to preserve those languages, and we need to be encouraging people to learn them. And I think finally, economically speaking, jobs matter and employment matters to people. You can't do anything else unless you know you can put a roof over your head and feed your family. And so making sure that we had the environmental protections, the negotiation with Indigenous peoples to approve the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline, and to know that construction is going to start this construction season. I've been pushing for that for 3.5 years. So I'm very happy to see those 15,000 jobs come to Alberta, and $15 billion a year stay in Canada and not go to the United States, because they can decide the price of our Canadian oil. So those are some of the things I'm proud of.
Thanks, Randy. Like, some people say the child benefit incentive is because Liberal Party won 4 more years. What do you say to that?
Well, I say, look, we did this early in the mandate because it's the right thing to do. I mean, if you take a look around the world, look at what's happening in France, look at what's happening in the United Kingdom, look at what's happening in the United States. When you have ultra wealthy and really poor people, it pulls at the fabric of society. And so what we said is there's a way that we can do this. I mean, when I grew up, there was a family allowance check that came in every month. And that disappeared in the late 80s, early 90s. And so we took a look at the way that Conservatives were doing this and all this complicated tax credits, and some was tax-free and some was taxable. It made no sense. So we said, look, the wealthiest people over 200,000 don't need to get a check every month for their kids. But everybody else could use a benefit. And the people who are single moms with kids who need that help need it the most. And so that's why we've set up the Canada Child Benefit in the way that we did. And because the economy is performing better, we were able to boost it faster, and we were able to index it faster. Now, what does it mean to index? It means if we kept the child benefit at the same level, well, inflation would start to eat at the value of your Canada Child Benefit. So by making sure that the child benefit increases incrementally, you're not losing out. And I think it's really important to say that the Canada Child Benefit is non-taxable. So that money is yours to spend. And the only thing I'd say, if people are watching, is make sure that you're registered on the Canadian Revenue Agency's tax base, so that you're able to qualify for your Canada Child Benefits.
So I saw the video you posted on your Twitter feed. It was Justin Trudeau talking about this benefit.
Yep.
And I read all the comments, and some people were not happy about it. My question is, why would some people not be happy about this?
You know, my answer to that is you got to ask those people. I mean, literally, I don't know why people wouldn't be happy for money coming to people who need it. I mean, look, we're all in the same boat in this country. And I've talked to people who said, I think so. That's why I'm a liberal. Okay. And honestly, I can say that if there's some people who think that the pie is only so big and you can't grow it, well, I'd say then that's a defeatist fixed mentality. And quite frankly, I believe in abundance thinking. I mean, I think it's not about the pie is so big and the pie doesn't grow. We can build the pie. We can grow the pie. And we can make sure that everybody has a piece, because quite frankly, nobody benefits from people who are homeless. And that costs the society $150,000 a year. And the costs on those people who are homeless are immeasurable. We don't benefit from having social cohesion with people who have so little that they're so envious of the people who have more, who can't even spend all they have. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that we make a societal contract to live together, to work together. And in Canada, we have values of inclusion. We have a medical system that you can be sick and walk into a clinic and somebody's going to take care of you, and it's not going to cost you $5,000 for that visit. Like, that's really important. You break your arm, you go get your arm fixed. We have agreed as a social contract as Canadians to work together. And the Canada Child Benefit is another example of that. I mean, if there's some grumpy people out there that don't like the policy conversation, then show me a better policy.
Okay, cool. You talked about the Inuit and the Métis just a little while before, but why are this group of people, it seems to me, at the bottom? There's still a lot of homelessness with these people. Mm-hmm. Especially in downtown area. I'm just asking for your thoughts on this. Why are we here with them?
So it's a really important question, and it's part of our commitment to reconciliation with First Nations people, Métis and Inuit. Look, if we talk about the low socioeconomic indicators of Indigenous peoples, there's also low social determinants of health, and the health outcomes of Indigenous peoples are the lowest in the country. Part of why that is the results of many generations of intergenerational trauma that have their roots, yes, in colonization, but also in residential schools. I mean, what do you do when your kids are taken away from you, and when the people that are running the schools are trying to change you from being an Indigenous person to a non-Indigenous person? I mean, that's going to have. I mean, I remember I've met with elders who remember going through the residential schools program and said, I wasn't white enough to be at the residential school, and then I wasn't indigenous enough to fit into my community anymore. So I didn't belong anywhere. And so what does that do to a person when they don't belong anywhere? And when everybody's telling them they don't fit anywhere? I mean, let's go back to how we set up the reserve system in the first place. Like, we took places that were remote and far away from economic centers because we wanted, I mean, the state wanted this group of people to be dependent because there were policies saying that we didn't want Indigenous peoples to continue their culture. Well, we know through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that thinking was wrong, and that we take it upon ourselves as a Liberal government, as a Justin Trudeau government, to do better with and for and by Indigenous peoples. And so that's why we're closing the education gap. That's why we're working on housing on reserve. That's why we're working in the boil water advisories. That's why children in care matter. That's why Indigenous languages matter. And so I can tell you there's 76,000 urban Indigenous people living in Edmonton. But where do they go for service? Because if they're not on reserve and the city's not set up to help, that's a real issue. So there's a gap between the provinces and the cities and the federal government that we need to close. And part of the reason I need and want 4 more years is to work so that we have a really clear and developed and funded urban Indigenous strategy, because it's needed here in Edmonton, it's needed in Winnipeg, it's needed in Regina and Saskatoon and communities across the country. 25% of Edmonton's youth population will be Indigenous by 2020. That's the highest concentration of Indigenous youth in the country. And our absolute Indigenous population is going to take over from Winnipeg and Regina in the coming years. So we need to be ready.
Should you get 4 more years? I hope you get 4 more years. What are your 3 top priorities for 4 more years?
Great question. Now you're really making me think. Prosperity for more Edmontonians, so that means jobs. It means jobs.
All right.
And so look, it's TMX, but it's also the green and clean economy. It's also artificial intelligence and machine language. It's about more women, more Indigenous people, more LGBT people, more newcomers stepping up and saying they want to run a business, and they figure out a clever way that people like what they're selling, and so they succeed. It's about making sure that as a federal government, we're clear about the supports to small business, because I think we've been pretty good at supports to big businesses that employ like 10, 15, 50,000 people, but not to the smaller businesses.
And Edmonton, indeed Canada, is a city of big business. I know it's hard for a one-man band or a small business to break even, or even just to start, because everyone, for example, in the tutoring market, everyone goes to Kumon. What about the independents there?
Look, earlier this month I met with representatives from the Black Canadian Women Organization, and they're working to empower Black Canadian women to get their businesses started. And I think 6 of the 8 women I met with all have side businesses, and they have government or other careers. It's really impressive. But we have to be clear about the programs, the funding. Like, how many of those people, and next time we meet we'll ask them, are part of the Alberta Women Entrepreneurs Organization? Right? How many of those women know about the Business Link? How many of those women know about the programs, the fact that we added $1 billion in the 2019 budget to support women and women in business? How do we connect those dots? We still have more work to do on that. And so that's why I want to make sure that we do. So one of my top priorities is jobs for more people, and those people who haven't typically been part of the economy. And look, I'm going to say it straight up. I know that there's lots of Caucasian men, and there's lots of people that have been running businesses for a long time. I want you to succeed, and I want more young white men and women to succeed in business as well. I want to make sure that the opportunities are there for everybody, because it's about bringing everybody along. That's number 1 priority. Number 2 priority is that we make sure that we are growing the economy in a way that protects the environment, and that we're serious about the environment. Have you seen all the rain we've had this summer?
Incredible.
Have you seen how warm one month was and then how cold the next month was? It was warmer in January than it was in May. That is not a normal Canadian winter.
No?
So there are things that are changing in our environment.
I'm new to Edmonton. The weather is crazy.
Look, the number one thing the Canadians do.
Yesterday. Look at the weather
No,
today.
no. It's like 30 degrees yesterday and it's pouring rain today, right? And will for a couple of days. So climate change is real.
Yeah.
Science is real. We're going to backstop
Some
the
people
Alberta
don't believe
government.
in
I know
climate
some
change.
people don't believe in
Yeah.
climate change, but they don't believe the 1,600 scientists. I believe 1,600 scientists that don't necessarily want to agree with each other.
All right.
But when they look at the details, the data, they say this is happening. And so what does it mean? It means imposing a price on carbon here in Alberta, like we said we would do, so that'll happen in January of 2020. But it also means stimulating the whole green economy. And let me be really clear. We're not going to stop pulling oil out of the ground in my lifetime. It's not going to happen. But we can do it smarter. We can do it cleaner. We can do it greener. And we can use the money from extracting fossil fuels to make sure that we're funding the next generation of businesses. And that's why I think our approach on TMX has been smart, because we've said that the profits from TMX will go to clean initiatives, and that includes clean and green businesses. But we've also said that we're going to continue working with Indigenous peoples on that. And then I think the third priority for me is continued human rights. And by human rights, I mean human rights of everybody here in Edmonton and in Canada, but also internationally. That means women can't get 83 cents on the dollar for their work anymore. So equal pay for equal work is a real thing. We need to have more women on boards. We need to have more women in business. We need to have more women in science, technology, engineering, and math. We need to have more women in the trades, which is why organizations like Women Building Futures. I mean, earlier this month, I attended this great event with, girls who were from 9 to 12 years old, maybe a little bit older. And it was a whole week. They're on a camp sponsored by IBM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. And I got to build structures with them out of marshmallows and toothpicks. And they had to decide whether pyramids or cubes were stronger, and they had to have a competition to see which of the structures they built would actually hold more playing cards. Well, guess what? There was aha moments in that room in the hour and a half that I spent with those girls. And one of the things I said to them is, what do you think? Should boys be able to do some things that girls can't do? And it was like, no! Girls need to be able to do the same things as boys. And so that's what I want to see. And it includes LGBT, it includes racialized communities, it includes the work that we need to do with Indigenous communities. And yes, Canada can and needs to continue playing a role internationally, and we will do so.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been told I've got 5 more minutes.
Okay.
I want to, I have to ask this question. This is Alberta's UCP, the one in this region, and your Liberal government. How are you? Are you able to work with them?
Look, we work with all provincial governments. That's really important for us to do. It's really important that the Kenny government not take the same lessons from the Ford government and work with us on infrastructure projects. It makes no sense to deny your citizens new projects like LRT or bridges or infrastructure or upgrades to community centers simply because you don't want to match the federal government's funding. Yeah. I haven't seen that yet, but it's really important. And I know the UCP government is claiming poverty and wants to add some more, wants to reduce the deficit. But at the same time, we also have to keep investing in our communities when we have interest rates that are at such historic lows.
Okay, I have to ask you about LGBTQ rights in this province.
Sure.
Do you see this government pushing back on it or advancing it?
Well, it's pretty clear. They canceled the conversion therapy working group and they pulled back the protections for kids at GSAs in the schools. So now principals can wait 2 years to respond to our request for a gay-straight alliance. The charter schools are exempted and so are the religious schools. So what do we have left? Edmonton Public and maybe the Calgary Board of Education that are going to protect kids who want just to be themselves. And we're talking about making sure that kids stay alive.
So what are you going to do about it?
Well, what we're going to do about it is work very carefully at a federal government level to make sure that kids are protected, to work with civil society. On the conversion therapy issue, we're actually looking at how we can criminalize that activity in the criminal code. And I've written a letter with Minister Lametti and Minister Petitpas-Taylor to all of the ministers of health and all the ministers of justice to say, how can we work together on this really important issue? Nobody should be subjected to any sort of physical or mental intervention that tries to change who they are.
That's right. I
do no harm. It's a really simple principle.
You're also a member of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. President Trump last weekend said to 4 women legislators to go back to where you're from. What are your thoughts on that?
So, look, we don't comment on U.S. politics.
No.
What I can say is this. If a colleague made similar comments like that here in Canada,
It's not going to happen.
I would say it was, well, we don't know. We've got a People's Party out there. We've got an MP like Michael Cooper that told a Muslim Canadian person at the Justice Committee that he should be ashamed for himself, and then sat there and quoted the manifesto from the Christchurch terrorist. So yes, it can happen in Canada. And if it does, we call it out and we say that's not acceptable. Because in Canada, diversity is our strength. So you're free to worship who you want to worship. You're free to love whom you want to love. You're free to, express yourself publicly, but you're not free to hate. And you're not free to call somebody out just because you don't like the way they look, or the way they dress, or the way they sound. So there should be no leader and no elected official telling people to go back to where they come from, because this country belongs to everybody who's come here.
I'm really encouraged when you say that. What are you reading now, Randy?
I am reading a spy novel. Okay, I finished a spy novel. And now I've moved over to John Rebus, Ian Rankin.
Okay.
John Rebus is back in his 60s. He's retired.
Yeah.
And then S.E. Irigoyen's Washington Black.
Okay, cool.
My partner's Jamaican, born, Toronto raised, and he's
Your
now living here
partner
on the
is Jamaican.
Yes, and now he lives here. He now lives here on the prairies.
I like
and
your takes, Randy. Very nice.
But
Very
Washington
good.
Black is about a Barbadian that is traveling and free during a time of slavery. So it's how do you handle the guilt of being free in a time of that kind of oppression?
Are
Right?
you really free?
And are you? And so that's the question, right? And so, look, I think we're a land of freedom. I think we're a land of peace and harmony and opportunity, and that's why I want 4 more years.
Yes.
Because we got to preserve and protect that.
Do you ever take time off to rest? You have a barbecue coming on the 27th?
Barbecue on the 27th, absolutely. 12:30 to 3 at North Glenora Community League. I try to get at least 7 hours a day of sleep. I go to the gym or I run, hang out with my partner David or the kids or my mom, friends, and just take a few minutes of breathers here when I'm there when I can.
Yeah. Finally, a
Sure.
word of encouragement you've to immigrants, which you referred to, women, to seniors, to youth in your constituency.
Well, look, this constituency, this city, this country is yours, and we want you to do all that you can do to make it better, and I'm here to help. The federal government's here to help. I can't wait to see what we're all able to accomplish together. And look, if you have a dream, if you have something you want to achieve, there are people that will help you do it. Just don't keep that inside. Share it with people so that they can help you get it done. And if there's any way the federal government or I can help, let us know.
I hope you get 4 more years, Randy. Thank you so much
Thank you. All the
for
best.
doing this.
Thank you.